I knew everyone was watching me that day, but I couldn't stop staring at him. I was the girl everyone judged. Too loud, too messy, too everything for this quiet little town. My hair never stayed in place, my clothes didn't match anyone else's, and I had this habit of laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't really funny, like I couldn't help myself. People whispered when I walked past them in the hallways of school, throwing glances that were sharp, judgmental, calculating. I could feel it all. The pointed fingers, the quiet muttering behind my back, the way my friends, or what passed for friends, gave me a wide berth. I felt like a shadow in the daylight, always too visible, always too much. And yet, somehow, I survived it, because I had learned early that the world would never understand me, and I couldn't stop being myself. And then there was him. The pastor's son. Quiet. Serious. Like he carried the weight of the whole church in his chest. He didn't talk much in class, didn't participate in gossip or petty arguments, and always seemed to have this calmness that made people step back without even realizing it. He had this way of walking through the hallways with his shoulders squared, his eyes forward, that made him seem untouchable. And the thing was, he was handsome, but not in the flashy, obvious way. It was subtle. The kind of look that made people forget to breathe when they saw him, even if they pretended they weren't paying attention. His name was Eli. And from the moment I saw him, my heart betrayed me in ways I didn't understand. It wasn't that I was looking for someone to like, honestly, I had learned to live without anyone noticing me, but Eli was different. He was a kind of storm that came quietly, sweeping into your chest without warning. He didn't need to speak for me to feel him there. The way he moved, the way he glanced at people, the way he occasionally tilted his head when listening, like he was weighing the world in his eyes, it was mesmerizing. It started in the library. I had chosen the farthest corner, the one behind a stack of old textbooks that smelled like dust and old paper, hoping I could disappear into the silence. It was late afternoon. The sun poured through the tall, narrow windows, painting golden stripes across the worn wooden floors. I loved the library for its quiet, for the way it felt like a bubble where I could exist without everyone staring or whispering about the way my hair stuck up in random directions or how my sneakers had scuffs on them. It was a sanctuary. And then he walked in. The light from the window hit him just right, glinting in his hair, catching the sharp line of his jaw, and for a second, I felt the air change. Nothing else existed. The rustle of pages, the distant coughs of other students, the faint hum of the old ceiling fan, it all disappeared. My heart started hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it, and maybe, somewhere deep inside, I wanted him to. Our eyes met. And I swear, just for a second, he looked curious. It wasn't the casual glance you get from someone passing you in the hallway. It was deliberate, like he had seen me for the first time, really seen me, through all the noise of who I was supposed to be and the whispers that followed me. I felt exposed, raw, like a truth I had buried deep inside myself had suddenly been uncovered. I looked away, quickly, hoping he didn't notice the flush that burned across my cheeks, but the curiosity lingered there, unspoken. I could feel it. And even though I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that this was just a fleeting moment, the truth was, it did. It mattered more than I wanted it to. I told myself it was harmless. A crush. Just a passing feeling that would fade, like it always did. I had no room in my life for complications, especially not someone like him, someone wrapped up in expectations, in a world so far from mine. But then he lingered near my table. Pretending to browse the shelves. Pretending to be looking for a book he didn't need. But every so often, his eyes flicked toward me, scanning, noting, memorizing. I caught glimpses of him when I thought he wasn't looking, and there it was again, the curiosity. The unspoken recognition of something in me that the rest of the world ignored. My chest tightened every time he leaned over, his hand brushing against a book I had just reached for. The contact was brief, but electric, leaving a trail of heat across my skin that I couldn't explain. My fingers lingered on the pages longer than necessary, hoping, praying, that he would notice the trembling of my hand, the way my heart was galloping behind my ribs. I hated how much I wanted him to notice. He didn't speak at first. Just this quiet presence, moving slowly, deliberately, as though he belonged to some different rhythm of life that I had never learned. But even in silence, he communicated more than most people did with a lifetime of words. A slight tilt of his head, a softened gaze, a gentle smile that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, moments that made my stomach twist with longing. And then, my name. He murmured it so softly I almost didn't hear it. You, right there. My heart skipped, tripping over itself in shock. Did he just say my name? I felt the blood rush to my face, and my eyes darted to him, catching the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I tried to pretend I hadn't heard, pretending to focus on the book in my hands, but I knew he had. He was watching me, waiting for me to respond in some way, to acknowledge the invisible thread connecting us in that small, sunlit corner of the library. I wanted to flee, to escape the intensity of his gaze, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, caught between fear and desire. Every time he shifted, leaned slightly closer to inspect a title on the shelf, brushed against the edge of the table, my pulse spiked. I hated how much my chest ached for him. I hated the way my mind kept replaying his face, his voice, the unspoken attention he gave me. Days passed, and he became a presence I couldn't avoid. Not that I wanted to. I started to notice the little things, the way he frowned when someone was unfair to another student, the way his eyes softened when he thought no one was looking, the way his laugh was quiet but genuine, the way he carried himself as if he was always guarding some fragile part of himself. I found myself lingering in places he frequented, pretending to read, pretending to study, just to catch another glimpse, just to hear my name roll off his tongue again, softly, like a secret promise. And I realized something terrifying: this wasn't just a crush. It was something deeper, something I had no control over. I found myself imagining conversations that never happened, imagining moments that might never exist. I pictured walking home with him beside me, talking about the smallest things, sharing secrets we weren't supposed to share. And the thought alone made my chest ache, made my stomach twist with a mixture of longing and fear. Because the truth was, he couldn't be mine. Not really. His life was carefully orchestrated, he had expectations, responsibilities, a reputation to uphold. And I was chaos. I was the girl everyone whispered about, the one people warned their children to avoid. And yet, he lingered. He noticed me. He let me exist in a way no one else had. Every encounter became a game of stolen moments. A brush of hands. A shared look across the room. A smile that spoke more than words ever could. And I clung to those moments like they were lifelines, like they were the only proof that someone in this world could see the real me, not the caricature everyone else had painted. I told myself I was imagining it. That he would eventually look past me, find someone more suitable, someone less loud, less messy, less me. But the thought of losing him, even before anything had started, was unbearable. And that library, with its sunlit corners and dusty shelves, became a stage for something forbidden. Something raw and unspoken, that neither of us dared name. The air around us seemed charged, thick with anticipation, like the world had shrunk to just the two of us, and every heartbeat echoed like a drum in the quiet space. I remember one afternoon in particular, when the late sun cast long shadows across the polished floors. I had reached for a book on the top shelf, and he appeared behind me, his hand brushing mine as he studied it. The contact was electric, a spark that shot straight to my chest and held me captive. I froze, trying to focus on the words, on the paper, on anything but him, but it was impossible. He was a storm I couldn't escape, a presence that demanded to be felt. He leaned slightly closer, and I could see the faint crease in his forehead, the way his lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but the words never came. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, though it was only seconds. And in that silent exchange, something shifted. Something that told me he felt it too, the pull, the tension, the impossible, forbidden connection that neither of us could name. I hated myself for wanting him. I hated the way my thoughts revolved around him, the way my stomach twisted whenever he was near. And yet, I couldn't stop. I couldn't look away. Because in a world that always told me I didn't belong, he had made me feel seen. Really seen. And so it continued. Every day, a little more, a little closer, a little dangerous. The library became our sanctuary, our battlefield, our secret world where I could exist as more than the girl everyone judged. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every whispered name carved him deeper into my mind, into my heart, into the small, fragile part of me that dared to hope for something extraordinary. Even now, just thinking about it, I can feel the tension in the air, the warmth of the sun on the wooden floor, the electricity of his presence lingering long after he's gone. It was intoxicating. And terrifying. And beautiful. All at once. Every day, I found reasons to pass by the church where he helped his father. It wasn't that I had anything to do there, not really. The pews were polished, the stained glass windows threw patterns of color across the floor, and the air smelled of old wood and burning candles, a mix so warm and strange that it became almost comforting. It wrapped around me the moment I stepped onto the worn stone steps, like it was protecting me from the small-town eyes that followed me everywhere else. I would linger just outside the doors, pretending to admire the architecture or glance at the neatly trimmed gardens, but my ears were always tuned to him. Even when he didn't know I was listening, I could catch the sound of his voice. Soft but commanding, the way he spoke to the younger kids in Sunday school, the way he read aloud passages, the way his laughter, rare and low, floated through the hall like it belonged there more than anywhere else. My chest would tighten each time. It was as if I'd been holding my breath my entire life, and hearing him breathe in the same world made the air suddenly scarce. And yet, I never approached him, not at first. I was terrified, of course. Afraid of what his father would think, afraid of what people would whisper behind my back if they caught me staring. Afraid of my own heart, which was stubbornly, recklessly, betraying me every time his name crossed my mind. But still, I found reasons to be there, lingering near the church steps, walking past the tall oak trees that lined the path, pretending to admire the sunlight breaking through the leaves while actually stealing glimpses of him. And then there were the small, impossible moments. Moments that didn't make sense but made me feel alive. The accidental touches when we both reached for the same book at the library, our fingers brushing, sending shocks through me that I didn't even know existed. My stomach would flip, my ears would tingle, and I'd wonder if he had felt it too. I'd catch him looking at me from across the room, those stolen glances that lasted just long enough for my heart to skip a beat but short enough that no one else could see. The cafeteria became its own battlefield. I'd sit with my friends, pretending to eat, pretending not to notice, but there he was. Always walking past, a tray in his hands, glancing up just long enough for our eyes to meet. And when they did, it was like the world stopped. The chatter of students, the clatter of trays, the hum of fluorescent lights, everything disappeared except for him and me, and the impossible tension that hung between us like a live wire. Sometimes, I caught him laughing at something I had said to someone else, something small and trivial, and my chest ached with jealousy. The ridiculous, irrational kind that makes your stomach twist and your fingers curl into fists. And I hated it, because I hated how much I wanted him. I hated that his attention, or even the thought of it, could make me feel like the world was spinning and standing still at the same time. I hated the way he seemed to see me. Not the version of me that everyone else had labeled, the loud, messy, reckless girl, but me. The part one hid from the world, the part that was tender, stubborn, hopeful, scared. That part that no one else seemed to notice. And I hated it even more because I couldn't stop thinking about what it would be like to let him in completely, to show him every messy, chaotic corner of my life and have him still look at me the same way. But of course, nothing good ever comes easy. This was Eli, after all. The pastor's son. The boy whose life was carefully watched, measured, and judged before he even had a chance to decide for himself. The boy whose father preached purity and the right path like it was the only option in the world. And then there was me, messy, loud, reckless, already branded with a reputation that everyone whispered about in hallways and behind lunch tables. I was everything he was supposed to stay away from. I was forbidden. I tried to tell myself that. I really did. I would walk past the church, take a deep breath of the warm, wood-scented air, and repeat the mantra, "He couldn't be mine." Not really. He wouldn't dare. Not in a town like ours, with everyone watching, judging, scrutinizing every choice we made. Not when there were expectations to uphold, rules to obey, a perfect image to maintain. Not when I was me. And yet, despite all that, I couldn't resist him. Every day became a balancing act between desire and fear. I'd find myself lingering in hallways just to pass by him, heart hammering, palms sweaty, mind spinning with possibilities I couldn't allow myself to imagine. I'd find myself glancing at him in class, pretending to take notes, pretending to listen to the teacher, but secretly counting the moments until he would look my way. The way his hair caught the light. The way his jaw clenched when he concentrated. The faint crease between his brows that made him look human, fragile, like he carried more inside than anyone would ever see. And the touches, the fleeting, impossible touches, were worse than anything else. Every brush of fingers over a book, every accidental bump in the hallway, every fleeting graze of his hand near mine was electric. It made my skin prickle, my stomach twist, my heart stutter in ways that scared me, exhilarated me, and made me ache all at once. Every time, I wondered, did he feel it too? Did he notice how my chest tightened, how my fingers lingered, how my breath caught in my throat? Or was it just me, imagining it because I wanted it to be real so badly? I couldn't stop myself from imagining what it would be like if he actually reached for me on purpose, if he smiled at me not by accident but because he wanted to. If he whispered my name softly in a quiet moment, not to anyone else but me, like it was a secret only we shared. And every time my mind wandered there, I cursed myself for letting it happen, for letting him occupy my thoughts so completely, for letting my heart betray me when it told me to be cautious. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the smallest of moments. The way he had shifted when our hands touched. The way he had looked at me across the cafeteria. The way he sometimes glanced at me with that impossible expression, like he understood the chaos I tried so hard to hide. My chest would ache, my mind would race, and I would silently whisper his name into the dark, as if saying it aloud might somehow make it real, or keep it from happening entirely. It wasn't just longing. It was fear. Fear of being discovered. Fear of what the world would say if they knew. Fear of what would happen if I let myself feel too much, too deeply, too fast. Because we both knew, in the quiet corners of our hearts, that this was dangerous. That it was forbidden. That it would hurt if we weren't careful. And yet, the pull between us was undeniable. The church steps became a place of temptation. I would linger, pretending to admire the gardens, pretending to adjust my books, pretending to be anywhere else, but always keeping my ears tuned to the sound of his voice. And sometimes, if I timed it right, he would appear, perhaps to help his father, perhaps for some errand or chore, and just being near him made my chest ache, made the air feel thick with possibility and tension. I hated that I wanted him. I hated that his every glance, every movement, every soft-spoken word wrapped itself around my heart and refused to let go. I hated that he was everything I wanted, everything I couldn't have, and everything I knew I shouldn't. Yet, despite all the fear, despite all the impossible odds, I kept going back. Because there was something in him that called to the parts of me that no one else ever saw. Something that made the world outside, full of judgment, full of whispers, full of rules I couldn't follow, fade into nothing. Something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't before. And I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just a crush anymore. It was something bigger, something more dangerous, something that would either consume me entirely or change me forever. I remember the day it all changed. I can still see it clearly, as if the sunlight that spilled across the cracked pavement behind the gym is burned into my memory. The smell of the late afternoon air mixed with the faint scent of the old wooden bleachers, the grass just beginning to turn dry under the edge of the fading sun. My backpack slipped a little from my shoulder, forgotten, as if the universe itself had stopped, holding me in place. He was there. Eli. Hands shoved deep into his pockets, the familiar tension in his jaw, the way he shifted slightly on the balls of his feet, like he was measuring every word, every movement. His eyes, God, those impossible eyes, were fixed on me, steady and unsettling. There was something in his gaze that made me want to run and yet, somehow, rooted me in place. It was that look that told me he knew exactly what I was feeling, even before I did. The gym was quiet behind me, the echoes of basketballs and sneakers having faded hours ago. Just us. Just that moment. The world had contracted until it was nothing but him, me, and the unbearable weight of everything unspoken. My heart was hammering so violently I could feel it against my ribs. I tried to focus on my breathing, tried to slow it down, but it was impossible. He had a way of making the simplest act, breathing, feel like a betrayal, because every inhale reminded me of him, and every exhale reminded me that I didn't belong in his world. Then he spoke. "Why do you look at me like that?" His voice was low, almost trembling, like he was afraid to let the sound escape fully, as if it might shatter everything between us if it carried too far. The question was simple, almost casual, but it landed in my chest like a stone. Why did I look at him like that? Because I was desperate, because I was alive, because he made me feel things I couldn't name. Because the world told me I was too much and he made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I was enough. I opened my mouth to answer, my tongue twisting, my voice a fragile whisper that barely carried. "I don't know," I admitted, small, trembling, exposed. "Maybe I just can't help it." The words hung in the air between us, quivering, fragile, but true. Because I couldn't help it. I couldn't help the way my chest tightened whenever he smiled, the way my stomach flipped whenever he looked at me, the way my thoughts spiraled toward him in moments when I had sworn I would never think of him at all. And then he laughed. A soft, almost whispering laugh that made the small hairs on my arms stand up. I wanted to curse him, wanted to tell him to stop because it made my chest ache in ways that were entirely unfair. But instead, I just froze, caught between wanting to laugh with him and wanting to disappear entirely. "You're impossible," he said, shaking his head, the corners of his mouth tugging up in that quiet, restrained smile that had me captivated from the start. His eyes, still locked on mine, held something I couldn't decipher. Mischief? Understanding? Maybe even vulnerability. The world tilted just for a heartbeat, unsteady and spinning, and in that tilt, I realized something terrifying. Maybe we were allowed to feel this. I could feel the heat rising in my face, prickling behind my ears and the back of my neck. My hands, which had been balled into fists at my sides, itched to reach out, to touch him, to prove somehow that he was real, that this wasn't a cruel illusion my heart had invented to torment me. I wanted to bridge that impossible gap between us, to step closer, to close the tiny distance that felt like miles. But fear anchored me. Fear and the knowledge of what it all meant. His father, the town, the whispers, they loomed over us like an invisible wall. Everything I had been warned about since the moment I had arrived in the small, suffocating town suddenly mattered. I was the girl everyone judged, and Eli, he was off limits. Perfectly off limits. And yet, here he was, inches away, asking questions no one else dared to ask, making the impossible seem, for just a heartbeat, possible. I noticed the way his shoulders tensed, the subtle shifting of weight from one foot to the other, the faint crease between his brows. He wasn't just teasing or mocking, there was sincerity there, a hesitancy, a vulnerability that he didn't allow anyone to see. It made my chest ache, but it also made me hope. Hope that maybe this wasn't just my foolish heart-spinning tales of what might be, but something real. Something that could survive the weight of judgment, the impossibility of the world around us. Impossible, I whispered to myself, more than to him. Impossible because he shouldn't want me. Impossible because even if he did, we would have to fight every glance, every judgment, every expectation that pressed down on him and me both. Impossible because I was too loud, too messy, too much. Impossible because the world didn't give people like us a chance. And yet, impossible had never felt so intoxicating. I could feel my hands trembling, and I pressed them into the pockets of my jacket, trying to anchor myself, to ground myself in something tangible because my mind was spinning. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to run from the intensity, from the tension, from him. But every fiber of my being was drawn to him, like a magnet, like gravity itself had shifted. I was powerless against it, and I hated how powerless I felt. He tilted his head slightly, eyes scanning my face as if searching for an answer beyond my words. I could feel the air between us thicken, charged with possibility and danger, and I realized that this wasn't just about stolen glances or accidental touches anymore. This was a moment of reckoning. The moment when the pull between us could no longer be ignored, when the unspoken tension, the forbidden desire, the sparks that had been flying for months, could no longer be denied. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice, trying to find words that could make sense of everything that was crashing through me. My mind raced with all the reasons I shouldn't feel this way, all the warnings that screamed in my head: his father, the town, the gossip, my reputation, the impossibility. And yet, none of that mattered in this frozen moment. All that mattered was him, standing there, asking questions that made my pulse leap, making me feel seen in ways I had never been before. "You're impossible," he said again, quietly, softly, like he was admitting it more to himself than to me. And I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that he wasn't just talking about me. He was talking about the connection, the tension, the impossible, breathtaking thing between us that defied logic, that defied rules, that had been growing quietly, relentlessly, until it could no longer be ignored. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, to let him see every part of me that I had hidden. I wanted to tell him that I felt the same way, that every heartbeat, every glance, every stolen moment had been leading to this. But fear gripped me again. Not just fear of judgment, but fear of vulnerability, of rejection, of exposing the fragile, tender parts of myself that I had worked so hard to protect. And yet, even as I froze, even as my chest ached and my stomach twisted, I felt it, the pull, the undeniable, magnetic pull that drew me toward him. The same pull that had made me linger outside the church every day, that had made my mind race with impossibilities, that had made my heart ache and soar in equal measure. He was dangerous, and wonderful, and forbidden, and I wanted him more than I had ever wanted anything else. The sunlight shifted, brushing across his hair, making the gold-brown strands glint in ways that seemed almost deliberate. I noticed the faint crease at the corner of his mouth, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, the subtle way his fingers twitched in his pockets as if he wanted to reach out but was holding back. Everything about him was precise, measured, controlled, and yet there was this wild, uncontainable energy, something raw and real that made my chest hurt with longing. I wanted to move closer, to tell him everything I couldn't say out loud, to let the tension break and let us finally exist in this impossible space together. But I stayed frozen, caught between fear and desire, trapped in the unbearable beauty of the moment. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the heartbeat of the moment stretched, elongated, and I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Something had shifted, irrevocably. The world outside the gym, the judgments, the rules, the impossibilities, they all faded into the background. There was only him, only me, only the impossible, intoxicating connection that had finally found its voice. I knew, in that moment, that I would never be able to forget this, the way he looked at me, the way his voice trembled ever so slightly, the way the world tilted just for a heartbeat, letting us feel something that had been forbidden and impossible for so long. And I hated that I wanted him. Hated that I needed him. Hated that my heart had been stolen in this one, fleeting, perfect moment behind the gym. And yet, I couldn't stop feeling it. But life isn't a movie. I had believed, for a fleeting heartbeat, that maybe it could be. That somehow, in the quiet corners of the library or behind the sunlit gym, the world would shrink and make space for us. That maybe the rules, the expectations, the judgment of everyone around us could be suspended for just a little while. I had dreamed that it could be like the stories I'd read, where love was enough, where desire didn't have consequences, where the heart could run free without fear. And then, the rumors started. It began subtly, at first. A whispered question in the cafeteria: "Did you see them together?" A glance that lingered a little too long in the hallways. Notes left in lockers with cruel jokes disguised as humor. My best friend, the one person I had trusted to see me clearly, to laugh at my stupid jokes, to stand by me even when the rest of the town whispered, started avoiding me. She didn't speak to me in class. She pretended not to notice when I waved. Her eyes, once warm and familiar, now held a strange, cautious distance. And I hated it. I hated the way it felt to be left out, to be silenced, to feel the sting of betrayal from someone I thought I could count on. His classmates noticed too. They stared at Eli in confusion, at the way he lingered near me, at the small smile that betrayed nothing but everything. Whispers followed him down the hallways, questions asked in hushed tones that made his jaw clench, his eyes darken. And he didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He just endured, silently, carrying the weight of the world like he always did, even as I watched and my heart broke in tiny, persistent pieces. And me? I hated how much I loved him. Every time he looked at me, my chest tightened as if my ribs had no space for the sudden swell of emotions. Every time he smiled at someone else, even in the most innocent, passing way, a cold jealousy seeped into my bones. My hands would ball into fists at my sides, and I'd whisper his name under my breath, half in longing, half in frustration at my own helplessness. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it didn't matter what anyone thought. That it was just a phase, a crush, a fleeting spark that would burn itself out. But the truth was, it wasn't a spark anymore. It was a wildfire, consuming my thoughts, my body, my very being. I couldn't escape it. I didn't want to escape it. I wanted him, and that want made everything else ache. And then, the twist. I wasn't expecting it. I never saw it coming. One afternoon, when the sun was low in the sky, golden and almost too beautiful, I wandered into the church garden. I needed space, needed to breathe, needed to feel something other than the constant churn of whispers and judgment that clung to me like a second skin. I expected to find peace among the flowers and the trimmed hedges, the soft chirping of birds, the faint scent of roses and freshly turned earth. I didn't expect him. And there he was. Eli. Sitting on the edge of the stone fountain, shoulders hunched, hands gripping his knees. His hair fell across his forehead, but the sunlight caught the tears streaking down his cheeks, making them glisten like rain in slow motion. I froze. My chest contracted, my stomach dropped. I had seen him frustrated, irritated, tense, but never vulnerable. Never like this. Eli, the untouchable, the perfect pastor's son, tears running down his face, exposed and raw. Time seemed to stretch. The soft hum of the garden, the distant echo of church bells, the rustle of leaves in the light breeze, all of it faded into nothing. There was only him. Only his grief, his fear, his humanity laid bare. And I wanted, more than I had ever wanted anything, to reach him, to fix him, to take away the weight that pressed down on him so heavily I could feel it from where I stood. "They think I'm weak," he admitted, voice breaking. The words were soft, trembling, but they pierced through me like shards of glass. That I can't choose, that choosing you would ruin everything. I wanted to step closer, to wrap my arms around him, to wipe away the tears I never thought I'd see on his face. I wanted to tell him it didn't matter what anyone thought. That it didn't matter what his father said, or the town whispered, or the rumors that clawed at us from every corner. I wanted to tell him that for once, he could be selfish. That for once, he could choose what his heart wanted instead of what everyone else demanded. But the moment I opened my mouth, the air shifted. His father appeared, sudden and silent as a storm. Face pale, eyes like storms themselves, sharp and unforgiving. He had heard everything. Every confession, every whispered fear, every trembling word. And just like that, the fragile world I had imagined, our stolen universe behind the fountain, our impossible connection, the moment that had felt like magic, collapsed under the weight of his presence. I could feel the tension in the air spike, crackling like lightning. Eli flinched, hands tightening into fists, shoulders rigid. I could see the fear in his eyes, the silent plea not to escalate, not to ruin everything. And I felt it too, terror, raw and immediate, clinging to my chest like a living thing. "Eli," I whispered, stepping forward, heart hammering. I wanted to reach for him, to shield him, to let him know that I was on his side. That I understood. But I stopped, because his father's gaze was like ice, cutting through everything, judging everything. It was the same gaze that had followed us all our lives, that dictated behavior, that decided right and wrong with a look. The garden, once a sanctuary, became a courtroom. The sun, once soft and golden, now seemed harsh, glaring, like it was highlighting every flaw, every betrayal, every forbidden emotion that dared to exist between us. I felt exposed, vulnerable, entirely too visible, as if the world was waiting to tear us apart piece by piece. Eli's shoulders slumped under the weight of expectation and fear. I wanted to scream, to tell him to fight back, to tell him that love, our love, impossible and reckless as it was worth it. But the words lodged in my throat, stuck between my longing and my terror. I wanted to tell him that it didn't matter what anyone thought. That love was ours if we wanted it. That we could exist, even if only in small, secret moments. But the presence of his father, looming like judgment incarnate, made it impossible. And I hated it. I hated the world for insisting that what I felt, what we felt, was wrong. I hated the people who whispered, who judged, who never understood. I hated my own heart for racing uncontrollably, for betraying me with its insistence on wanting him so badly. I hated the fact that I couldn't do anything but watch him crumble under expectations I couldn't protect him from. Eli looked up at me then, eyes red, voice quiet. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to ruin everything, but I can't stop thinking about you. Not once. And my chest ached. Because I felt the same. Every heartbeat, every breath, every trembling part of me screamed the truth I couldn't speak aloud. His father's presence was a barrier I couldn't cross. The world was a barrier I couldn't cross. And yet, there he was, crying, broken, human, and more real to me in that moment than anyone I had ever known. I wanted to step closer, to touch him, to whisper that it was okay. That no one's opinion mattered. That we could find a way through the impossibility together. But fear held me back. Fear of judgment, fear of consequences, fear of the world collapsing even further. And so I stood there, frozen, heart hammering, staring at him and feeling everything, longing, jealousy, fear, helplessness, and a love so deep it scared me. The rumors, the whispers, the impossibility, they all pressed down, but in the middle of it, I could see him clearly. Vulnerable. Human. My impossible, untouchable Eli, crying in the golden light of the late afternoon, and somehow, against all reason, I loved him even more for it. And just like that, the moment shattered completely when the pastor's shadow fell over us, and I realized nothing would ever be simple. Nothing would ever be easy. We were torn apart. The silence wasn't just an absence of words, it was a presence that filled every corner of my life, pressing against me in quiet, relentless waves. Weeks stretched into months, each one longer than the last, and every day felt heavier than the one before. I walked through the small town streets pretending I didn't care, head held high, mask in place, pretending that the whispers of judgment, the pointed fingers, the side glances, didn't sting. Pretending my heart wasn't breaking every time I passed the church, its tall steeple looming over the town like a reminder of everything I had lost. Pretending I didn't hear his laugh in the wind, soft and teasing, whispering my name across the empty streets, across the rows of neatly trimmed hedges, across the lives that had once seemed ordinary and now felt impossible without him. I forced myself to move through my days mechanically, counting steps instead of moments, making lists I didn't intend to finish, hiding behind busywork to mask the ache in my chest. I smiled at friends I barely saw, exchanged greetings I didn't feel, laughed at jokes that barely registered. But under every forced smile, under every calculated nod, there was a hollow, gnawing space, and that space was filled with him, Eli. The boy I had loved, the boy I had lost, the boy who had carved himself into my life in ways I didn't know I could survive without. And yet, slowly, imperceptibly at first, I began to heal. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sudden revelations or epiphanies. Healing came in fragments, a laugh I allowed myself to have without thinking of him, a morning I spent walking by the river alone, feeling the sun warm my shoulders and realizing I could breathe again. Healing came in the quiet moments I allowed myself to exist without guilt, without longing, without the suffocating weight of expectation and heartbreak pressing down on me. I learned, painfully, that my worth wasn't tied to his approval. That my value wasn't measured by whether he looked at me, smiled at me, or chose me over the impossible rules that had governed his life. I learned that the whispers of the town, the pointed fingers, the disapproval of parents, teachers, and peers, it all faded when I stopped letting it matter. When I started caring less about the outside world and more about the small, fragile, stubborn thing inside me that had survived every judgment, every heartbreak, every impossible longing. I learned that loving someone didn't always mean being with them. That sometimes, love was quiet, patient, waiting for the right moment or the right courage to arrive. That love could exist in stolen glances across crowded rooms, in thoughts whispered in the night, in the memory of a hand brushed against yours, even when the world said it shouldn't. And in that quiet growth, in that fragile reclaiming of myself, something shifted. Something in my chest settled, something in my mind cleared, and I began to understand that my heart had room for more than just pain, it had room for hope, for courage, for life. And then one summer evening, when the golden light spilled across the river where we had first met secretly behind his father's house, everything changed again. The air was thick with the smell of warm earth and ripening grass. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the water, turning everything it touched into a kind of slow, breathing magic. I had come to this place to be alone, to feel the river's quiet pulse against my thoughts, to remember that I could exist in the world without him and still be whole. But he found me. I saw him before I heard him, standing at the edge of the riverbank, shoulders relaxed but tense in a way that only he could pull off, like he was both cautious and desperate at the same time. His eyes, those impossible, knowing eyes, met mine, and my breath caught. Every step he took toward me was measured, deliberate, a silent echo of every heartbeat we had shared without touching, without words, without permission. I tried, he whispered, voice raw, almost breaking. The words carried across the distance, a soft, urgent plea. I tried to stay away, to do the right thing. But I can't. Not anymore. The ache in my chest was sudden, sharp, and all-consuming. I wanted to run to him, to throw myself into his arms, to press my forehead against his chest and finally let him know everything I had kept inside all these weeks. I wanted to tell him that I had thought of him every day, that every sunset had reminded me of the light in his eyes, that every breeze had carried a fragment of his voice. I wanted to confess that the silence had been unbearable, that the longing had been relentless, that I had counted the moments until we could exist in the same space again. But I didn't move right away. I was frozen, caught between fear and hope, between the memory of heartbreak and the possibility of something new. His voice trembled, and I could hear the strain in it, the weight of weeks spent resisting, of longing restrained, of love hidden behind impossible expectations. And yet, there he was. Eli. Human. Vulnerable. Real. And entirely, impossibly mine in that suspended, golden moment. I stepped closer, each movement deliberate, each heartbeat a drum in my chest. The river beside us flowed lazily, reflecting the last light of the sun, rippling in time with the tension that hummed in the air. I could smell the faint mix of his cologne and the river, the way the warm evening carried both the scent of earth and something uniquely him. My hands twitched at my sides, wanting to reach for him, to bridge the distance that had kept us apart for so long. I began, voice trembling, that maybe you had forgotten me. That maybe the silence meant nothing. My words fell softly, carried away by the gentle murmur of the river. His lips twitched into a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it didn't reach his eyes entirely. There was still tension there, lingering shadows of doubt, of fear, of the weight of judgment we had carried for so long. I could never forget you, he admitted, voice catching. Not for a day, not for an hour. Every moment away, it tore me apart. The ache in my chest twisted, bittersweet, because I had survived without him, learned to breathe without him, discovered my own strength, but hearing him say it made all that survival pale in comparison. All those weeks of healing, all the steps I had taken to reclaim myself, suddenly coexisted with the raw, undeniable pull that he had on me, the force of his presence that had always felt like gravity. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to close the distance between us in a single heartbeat, to feel the warmth of his hand against mine, the brush of his fingers over mine, the way his body fit next to mine like it had always been meant to. But I paused, caught between the intensity of the moment and the fear that had haunted us for months. He took a step closer then, and the space between us shrank. Every inch brought my heart closer to exploding, brought the memories of stolen glances, secret touches, whispered conversations flooding back in a wave of sensation. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the faint tremble in his shoulders, the tension that spoke of restraint and desire in equal measure. "I shouldn't be here," he murmured, almost to himself, almost apologetically, though I knew he had every right to be here. I tried to do the right thing, but the right thing isn't always what the heart wants. I swallowed hard, feeling my own pulse racing, the heat of the summer evening pressing against my skin, the river's gentle flow mirroring the turbulence in my chest. "Then, what do we do?" I whispered. "If the right thing isn't this?" He shook his head slightly, running a hand through his hair, his expression conflicted, vulnerable, and achingly human. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that I can't stay away. Not anymore. Not from you." The world around us seemed to hold its breath. The ripples of the river, the faint rustle of the trees, the distant song of a bird settling in for the night, all of it faded into the background. There was only him. Only me. Only the impossibility of everything we had endured, and the overwhelming truth that, despite it all, we still existed for each other. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully understood during all the weeks of silence and self-healing. Loving someone wasn't just about being patient or waiting. Loving someone, sometimes, was about recognizing when the moment had arrived. About understanding when the heart had spoken so clearly that everything else, the judgment, the whispers, the fears, faded into irrelevance. I took another step closer. Closer than I had been in weeks. Closer than I had ever allowed myself to be. And as the golden light spilled across the river, illuminating his face, the tension between us felt like a living, breathing thing. I can't stay away either," I whispered, voice trembling. "Not anymore." His lips quirked into a soft, almost shy smile, and the way his eyes softened made something inside me melt. The weight of the past weeks, the longing, the fear, the impossible ache of being apart, all of it dissolved into the warmth of that single, fragile moment. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to hope. And I realized, in the quiet rush of that summer evening, that maybe love wasn't about perfection. Maybe it wasn't about rules, about schedules, about who said what was right or wrong, or about the endless, suffocating expectations that had weighed so heavily on us for months. Love, I discovered in that heartbeat, in that golden light spilling across the river, wasn't about fitting neatly into the boxes the world tried to force us into. Love was messy, unpredictable, impossible sometimes, but real, undeniable, and breathtakingly beautiful. I could feel it in every thrum of my heart, every tremor in my hands, every quickening of my breath. I could see it in the soft curve of his jaw, the way the sunlight caught the faint glint of warmth in his eyes, the subtle shift of his shoulders as he finally let himself relax into the possibility of us. And in that moment, clarity struck me harder than anything I'd ever felt. Love wasn't about what others thought it should be. Love was about truth. About daring to stand in the light, even when everyone else expected darkness, even when the world seemed to be stacked against you, even when your heart told you it was risky and reckless and impossible. I reached for him. My hand trembled as I lifted it, hesitant at first, the weight of months, of judgment, of whispered rumors, pressing down on my fingers. But then I felt the warmth of his palm against mine, and the tension in my chest began to ease, just slightly, just enough to breathe. Heart pounding, eyes filling with tears that were not sadness but relief, I whispered, almost to myself, almost a confession, "Then don't." "Don't what?" he asked, voice low, caught between disbelief and hope, caught between fear and the sudden, dizzying freedom of the choice he'd been afraid to make. "Don't let anyone else decide," I said, voice trembling but certain. "Don't let anyone else tell you what we are. Don't let the whispers, the judgment, the rules, none of it matters. We don't need permission. We just need each other. His hand squeezed mine, fingers intertwining, and in that simple, unspoken gesture, I felt the weight of every impossible week lift from both of us. There was no fanfare, no dramatic confession, no grand declaration to the town, no need for anyone else to witness the moment. It was just us, standing at the edge of the river where sunlight and shadow met, where hope and fear collided, where love, real, messy, undeniable love, finally had a chance to exist. The world around us seemed to dissolve. I could hear the river, slow and steady, rippling against the rocks, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the soft hum of insects settling for the evening. Everything else faded, the judgment, the whispers, the expectations, the months of separation. There was only him. Only me. Only the truth that had been there all along, waiting for us to find it, waiting for us to be brave enough to claim it. We stood there for a long time, not speaking, just feeling each other, letting the silence stretch, letting the connection solidify, letting the possibility sink into our bones. I could feel the heat of the sun lingering on my skin, the gentle brush of wind through my hair, the faint scent of river water and earth mingling with him, with this moment, with everything that had led us here. I felt his pulse under my palm, steady but quickening, and I realized that in all the impossibility, in all the longing, in all the whispered fears, this was what I had been waiting for. This was what love had meant all along. I never stopped, he finally said, voice breaking the quiet, soft and raw, almost reverent. Not for a day. Not for a moment. Even when I tried, even when I told myself it wasn't possible. I know, I whispered back. My voice was thick with emotion, full of the months of waiting, the heartache, the longing, the relief. I never stopped either. I thought I could, but my heart, it refused. Even when it hurt. Even when it was supposed to. It refused to stop loving you. The warmth of his hand, the certainty in his gaze, the vulnerability in his voice, it all merged into a kind of dizzying clarity that made the world seem both impossibly wide and perfectly intimate. In that moment, I realized that we didn't need anyone else's approval. We didn't need to explain ourselves, justify our feelings, or apologize for wanting something the world had deemed forbidden. We only needed each other. And so I let myself lean closer, just a fraction, enough to feel him near without rushing, without forcing the moment. I let myself breathe him in, the faint scent of soap and summer heat, the slight tension in his shoulders relaxing under my gaze. I let my heart open fully, unguarded, unafraid, ready to accept that love, real love, didn't demand perfection. It demanded courage. It demanded honesty. It demanded daring to stand in the light when the world expected darkness. I want this, I said, voice barely more than a whisper, but full of certainty, full of truth. I want us. And I don't care about the rest of the world. Not anymore. His lips curved into a small, almost shy smile, and yet his eyes shone with a kind of relief and awe that made my chest ache with longing and joy all at once. Me too, he said simply. Me too. We didn't need grand gestures or public declarations. We didn't need the world to understand, or the town to approve. We didn't need to rewrite the rules or fix the judgment or silence the whispers. All we needed was this, here, now, with each other, with hearts open, with courage enough to be honest, with the reckless kind of bravery that only love can demand. I still think about that summer, every stolen glance, every secret smile, every whispered promise that belonged only to us. I think about the warmth of the river, the golden light spilling over everything, the way the wind carried our laughter in tiny bursts across the water. I think about how it felt to finally be brave enough to say the words, to hold his hand, to choose him when everything else in the world said I couldn't. And I smile. Because even in a world full of judgment, even in a town full of whispers and rules and expectations, love can find a way. Even when it seems impossible, even when it seems forbidden, even when it feels like the world itself is against you, love can carve out a space. A small, precious, infinite space where you can be yourself, where you can be seen, where you can be loved for exactly who you are. And now, I ask you, if you were in my place, standing at the edge of the river with someone who made your heart ache in every possible way, someone who had been impossible and forbidden and perfect and human all at once, would you risk it all for love? Would you dare to step into the light, hand in hand with the one who makes your heart race, even if the world says you shouldn't? Would you let yourself be vulnerable, be fearless, be real? Or would you stay in the shadows, pretending it's safer, pretending that love isn't worth the risk? I hope you would dare. Because real love is always worth it. The heartbreak, the longing, the whispered fears, they all fade when you find someone who sees you, who stands with you, who refuses to let the world define the truth of what you feel. And that moment, that first heartbeat of courage and honesty, is everything. So if this story touched you, if it made your heart ache, or if it reminded you of a love you've dared to chase, or one you're dreaming about chasing, then I want to hear from you. Comment below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, like the video, share it, and most importantly, subscribe, so you don't miss the next story that will make your heart race, make you feel, make you believe in the impossible power of love. Because I want to know, if you were in my place, would you take the risk? Would you stand in the light, hand in hand with the person who makes your heart beat too fast, even when the world expects you to hide? I can't wait to read your thoughts.